we've got the Alabama Crimson Tide. Alabama was 12-2 last year, SEC champion, lost in the semifinals to Michigan, and lost their coach. More importantly, Nick Saban retired after the season. So you had Kalen DeBoer taking over his first season at Alabama. Alabama went 9-4 this season, not close to the norm that we've seen in recent years. They finished number 17 in the rankings, and I think we talked about this in the rankings recap last episode. It was the first time that they'd finished outside of the top 10 in years. So overall, I would say that this season is definitely a disappointment for Alabama. It's just a bad first year for them and a bad impression for DeBoer. He was the coach at Washington last year, and Washington made it to the national championship. So lots of people had high expectations that this was just going to be some easy handoff from Nick Saban to Kalen DeBoer, and it was going to be success, and they were going to keep the band rolling. But it really wasn't that. This Alabama team looked a little bit different than Alabama teams you've seen under Saban. Just a little bit more undisciplined, just not quite as consistent. And I think that started in the Georgia game, a game which they won. They got out to this big lead, and then they let Georgia come back, and ultimately they took the lead. And Alabama was able to win because they had fantastic players make fantastic plays. But they beat Georgia, and people were calling them the greatest team in the country again, and then they turned around and they lost to Vanderbilt. And all of a sudden, people kind of saw that, hey, maybe this wasn't a Nick Saban team. This Alabama team was very, very reliant on quarterback Jalen Milroe, to the point where one of the strengths of Alabama had always been a balanced rushing attack. And this year, Jalen Milroe was their leading rusher. Justice Haynes didn't really get things going, and he transferred out, and they just didn't have that strong rushing attack. And Milroe made more mistakes than he'd made in past games. Alabama still had a good shot to make the playoffs ultimately, but then they choked when they went to Oklahoma and got absolutely stomped. And then they lost to Michigan in their bowl game, which, yes, you can say bowl games might not mean as much, and Michigan was really fired up coming off the win over Ohio State, but I still don't think that they should have lost that game. They were a heavy favorite in that game. I think Alabama lost 3 games this year, and in all 3 games, they were favored by like 17 points or more. So just an overall disappointing season for the Crimson Tide in their first year under Kalen DeBoer. For me, I gave Alabama a grade of a C. Burl, how about you?
Okay, so if I was giving Alabama their annual review, and I have to select, their rating, I'm going to have to go with not meeting expectations. So they're not going to get a raise this year. They're not going to get a promotion. Pretty crappy year, all things considered. You have the third most talented roster in all of college football. Third most talented roster in all of college football. Actually, no, it's the second most talented. Now that I think about it, is you had Ohio State was number 1, Bama, then Georgia. That was your top 3 in the Bud Elliott blue chip ratio thing. And you would think you've got a coach coming in who just played in the national championship, so he might know a thing or two about coaching football teams. But we did not see the same type of discipline and the standard that Alabama usually has. We saw players acting a fool on the field in multiple games. We saw a lot of mistakes that you normally wouldn't see in a Nick Saban team. The defense wasn't nearly as crisp as it's usually been, and they end up having some really bad losses down the stretch. I mean, that loss to Oklahoma, that's got to go down as one of the worst of all time. And Vandy, they lost to freaking Vandy. Granted, Vandy better this year. They're still Vandy. Doesn't matter. I don't care how good they get. They're still Vandy. They're Vandy to me, damn it. But yeah, they did not meet the Bama standard, missed the playoff. They did get that great win over Georgia. But yeah, had some really bad losses there. 9-4. They were kind of on the cusp of making the playoff. They were essentially the first out. So we're actually reversing roles here. I actually gave them a C+.
Okay. So Burrow gives Alabama a C+. I gave them a C. In this case, I'm willing to come up with a C+ for you because of that point that they did almost make the playoff in a first year under a new head coach. So maybe that bumps it up. But don't tell the people on Feinbaum because they think that Alabama got an F.
Of course, yeah. I mean, gosh, what a weird year for Bama. Like, how do you drop off the 4 losses? That's wild.
Yeah, but I mean, if you think about it, look across the country. Everybody had losses this year in the regular season except for Oregon. I mean, Georgia had 3 losses. Your national champion had 2 losses in the regular season. So it was a little bit different of a year. I mean, obviously the changing of the playoff and how people value things has obviously changed a lot in terms of who wins and loses games. Yeah, it's just it was a season of change, as I mentioned before.
Yeah. We definitely wouldn't have seen Nick Saban losing to Oklahoma.
At least not in the fashion that they did.
Oh yeah, it was brutal.